As we await for people to join, I think for the oral presentations, I was quite struck by the rise in AI and its potential impact on people. Okay. Can you hear me? So I was saying, as we wait for people to slowly trickle in, although it's time, I was kind of reflecting on the conversations that were held here, the oral presentations, and what struck me was the rise in AI and its potential impact on African nations. I think it's high here in the US and in European countries and others, and I think it's getting onto the African continent. So I was actually connecting with Megdes to learn more about that and how it actually ties in with Ngosia's presentation about consciousness. So I think that's an interesting thing I would like to explore more. I think we have enough people to get started. So I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. So our keynote speaker is Dr. Gilbert Kwabena Buhari, and he'll be presenting on One Continent, Igniting the Power of African Potential. So a bit about Dr. Buhari. He is a systematic theologian specializing in Pan-African religions and a graduate of the Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University, New York. He currently serves as the director of the God Box Foundation, TGBF, a Pan-African interfaith organization dedicated to embracing, celebrating, and promoting the spiritual and religious diversity of Pan-African community. He was mentored by the late Dr. James Corn, as well as the distinguished scholar, Dr. Cornel West. TGBF stands as the first Pan-African interfaith and multi-faith organization devoted to fostering dialogue and theological reflections that highlight the richness of spiritual traditions across the global Pan-African family. Beyond his work with TGBF, Dr. Buhari serves as the Director of Operations for the PANAFest Festival, one of the celebrated Pan-African festivals worldwide. He also holds the role of Director of Operations for the Pan-African Heritage World Museum, an institution committed to preserving and showcasing the history and contributions of people of African descent globally. In addition, he's done a lot. In addition, Dr. Buhari played a key role in developing the proposal for Ghana's landmark Year of Return 2019, an initiative that commemorated 400 years since the first recorded arrival of enslaved Africans into North America and encouraged members of the African diaspora to reconnect with the continent. In addition to his leadership roles, Dr. Buhari frequently lectures at seminaries and universities in Ghana and the United States, where he engages audience on themes of Pan-African spirituality, theology, culture, and global African identity. Please, let's give a round of applause to welcome Dr. Buhari. So I think this works, in case you want to use it. And then you have to speak closely to the microphone. Okay, somebody's going to do that. Yeah, somebody's also going to do that. I go. Okay, me Ghana for a while. Yenya nase de oni abaha. Yeda yenanum so wase. We want to give thanks to the Most High for bringing us all here, and we also give thanks to the ancestors upon whose shoulders we stand. I also want to give a big thank you to my brother, Patrick Aban, the president here, and also to the organizers here at Penn State. So, I want to begin with attempting to answer the two fundamental questions that were posed to the speakers under this year's theme, One Continent, Igniting the Power of African Potential. Those two questions were,
what is Africa's future, and what vision can guide equitable, sustainable, self-defined development in Africa? So the first part of my presentation will attempt to address the first question, and obviously the second part of my presentation will attempt to answer the second question. So what is Africa's future? As we see here in slide 1, I believe Africa's future is its past. Now, I know this statement may seem quite paradoxical, almost controversial. So before our young progressives and scholars start walking out of here, I want us to think critically about this statement. Africa's future is its past. At first hearing that sounds like regression, might even sound backwards. Sounds like we're abandoning progress. But what if I told you that the problem is not that Africa is too far behind? In fact, I believe the problem is that Africa has been pushed too far away from itself. Next slide. So, I don't think anyone can deny the greatness of Africa's past. From the great civilizations of Ethiopia, Egypt, Nubia, to our harmonious relationships with nature and all living things. Africa and our ancestors developed ways of being rooted in a profound understanding of a universal and cosmological spirit that ordered life and existence. We built monuments and pyramids, systems of knowledge that continue to stand as wonders of the world, so profound that even modern science is still attempting to fully comprehend them. This was not an accident, and this was not a myth. In fact, I believe this was the blueprint. A blueprint that was not only admired, but extracted, imitated, and in many cases stolen. Alongside our land, our ancestors, our bodies, which were temples in our eyes that became commodities. And yet, beyond the physical, there was something even deeper that was taken. During the colonization of Africa was also the colonization of knowledge itself and how we understand the world, God, and ourselves. Next slide. So the question we must ask, I believe we've gone too far. Right. The next slide. If our past produced sustainability, identity, and self-definition, then the question, what is Africa's future, assumes that our future somehow lies in abandoning our past. Because what history shows us is that the interruption that slavery and colonization caused in Africa did not begin with economic failure. That wasn't our issue. Whatever economic systems our ancestors had were sustained and were vibrant. They built vibrant economies through centuries of our golden ages. Africa's takeover by Europeans did not begin with our political weakness. Our democratic processes at the time were quite efficient and effective. It's clear that our interruption began when we were systematically separated from our own ancestral systems of traditional and spiritual beliefs, our own ways of knowing, and our relationship with the divine. Once we began to replace our own African worldview with someone else's, I believe some of our scriptures call that worshiping other gods. When we began to imitate instead of originate, I believe some of our scriptures calls that worshiping foreign gods. When we began to assimilate and accommodate and accept foreign ways of living revealed in how we dress, how we eat, how we relate with one another, instead of self-affirming our unapologetically African selves, this is when the disruption began. You can go to the Sankofa. So many of you may be familiar with the Akan symbol from Ghana, known as Sankofa. It is often depicted as a bird moving forward, yet turning its head backwards to retrieve an egg from its back. So this image carries a profound meaning. Sankofa teaches us to return and reclaim. It reminds us that we must go back and take hold of what has always been ours: our knowledge, our identity, our source. It carries a deeper message that the only way to truly move forward is to first reach back and reclaim what was lost. Next slide. Now, I know we've been taught by our European conceived intellectual universe that time and progress is a straight line. This makes us believe that the past is primitive. The past is almost something to discard, almost to be ashamed of. That the present is transitional, so we never really appreciate the now. We're always looking forward to trading the present for something better. And the future is advanced, something we can only aspire to experience. And so our notions of progress and development are heavily influenced by the West, and therefore our journey towards progress and development becomes a journey of distance from our origins, from our source, from our past. Next slide. But in African thought, time and development is not linear at all. African time is circular. The past, the present, the future are all interconnected. What has been continues to live within what is and shapes what is to come. This is why we believe we give birth to our ancestors. In African time, cosmology, development is continuity. It's not departure. Progress is not defined by moving away from origins, but by deepening them and extending what has already been established. Identity is also continuous. In African thought, identity is not reinvented, it is inherited, remembered, and expressed across generations, linking the living, the ancestors, and the unborn. So the past really is never gone. It is a living force that informs our decisions, making our values, and gives us direction. In order for one to move forward, one must remain connected to the source. Development is the unfolding of an existing essence. It is not the creation of something entirely new. I'd like to say that the past is never behind us, it is always within us. Next slide. So, when I say Africa's future is its past, I am not calling us to go backwards. I am calling us to go deeper. Because slavery, before colonialism, before the disruption of our systems of knowing, Africa had systems of governance, systems of spirituality, systems of economics, systems of community. They were not broken, and they were not destroyed. And in fact, they were never lost. Even among Africans who were violently stripped away from their origins in Africa, brought here into the diaspora, and subjected to unimaginable oppression with the intent of erasing their memory of who they were as Africans. And even on the continent, through colonization, which led many of us to abandon our own systems of belief and ways of life, we know that these systems were still never destroyed. Our knowledge, our wisdom, our shrines, our spiritual power, and our ways of being remain. They were just simply interrupted. Next slide. So the question is not how do we build Africa's future? I think that's a bit problematic and a bit distorted. I'm sure many of our educated African scholars over the years and even today have studied the development of the West and concluded that if we simply mimic what the West has done, if we can look more like the West, then we are progressing. But I want to make this statement clear when I say development is not imitation. Because what we often admire as Western progress, we, I'm sure, know did not emerge in a vacuum. It was built in large part on centuries of extraction, taking away bodies that were temples of God that did not belong to them, exploiting of Africa's resources, once again, taking what didn't belong to them, and taking advantage of nearly almost 300 to 400 years of free labor through slavery. So unless Africa and Africans are prepared to replicate some of these evil conditions, and I'm pretty sure we are not and must never be, then we cannot simply copy the outcomes and expect the same results. So then the real question, I believe, is how do we continue what was interrupted? Next slide. So this is what I call originization. Do not look this word up, it doesn't exist. It's just a term I created within a hermeneutical construct of what Pan-African theology could be in the 21st century. Originization challenges African notions of indigenization, which is pretty much what we've been doing throughout the 20th century. What indigenization teaches us, Africans, is to adopt foreign systems to African contexts. My construction of originization is about reclaiming Africa as a source of knowledge, of spirituality, and of civilization itself. It's a Sankofa hermeneutic, to go back and reclaim. Next slide. Because I believe if we do not remember, return, and reclaim, then what happens is development becomes dependency. We begin to rely on external and foreign systems, models, and validation rather than building from our own foundations. Progress becomes imitation. We measure success by how closely we resemble those we think are more advanced, instead of expressing who we truly are. And identity becomes confusion. We begin to lose clarity of who we are, and we're caught between inherited traditions and imposed realities. I believe this is what the great Pan-Africanist W.E.B. Du Bois called the double consciousness, a strange two-ness, the experience of seeing oneself through two lenses, one rooted in our own identity, African identity, and the other shaped by how the world has defined us. And this tension that the Pan-African family, both on the continent and in the diaspora, continues to wrestle with even till this day. Next slide. So I say again, Africa's future is its past, not because we are going backwards, but because the future can only be born from what we truly are. I believe Amilcar Cabral said, that Pan-Africanism is about the Pan-African family returning to its source. Next slide. Therefore, the Pan-African family, if we say Africa's future is its past, if we believe in this Sankofa movement, then we know that we are not moving forward by leaving our past. We are simply moving forward by becoming our past. What we call our past is not behind us. It is the womb of our future. Next slide. So with all that said, the next question that we must try to answer is, what vision can guide equitable, sustainable, self-defined development in Africa? But again, before we answer that, I'd like to reframe the question, given what we now know about Africa's future being its past. Because the assumption hidden in this question, again, is Africa's future still needs to be figured out. That the vision is something we must create from scratch almost. But I submit to you that Africa does not need a new vision, it just needs a recovered one. Next slide. We have folks like Graham Hancock, who said Africa is a species with amnesia. You have Malcolm X, who said, when the people are taught to forget their past, someone else gets to decide their future. So memory becomes a form of resistance. Marcus Garvey said, a people without its roots is like a tree that cannot grow. The great James Baldwin said, remembering the past is not the same as drowning in it. And our great Pan-Africanist Kwame Nkrumah said, I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. Next slide. So what is this 21st century Pan-African Renaissance demanding of us? It seems it's simply for us to remember. Not simply to remember just in thought or memory, but to remember in the fullest sense, to bring back together what was broken apart, to reconnect the bodies, the temples, the people who were separated from their source. The members must return to the body, and the body must return to the source. Next slide. So this is the vision that will guide Africa forward. This vision will not be focused on Western capitalism or imported democracy or even external developmental frameworks. This vision must emerge from Africa's own historical, spiritual, and epistemological foundations, because one cannot build a self-defined future using borrowed definitions. Next slide. Therefore, what should Africa's future actually look like? I humbly propose 4 things. First, I believe, is our spiritual serenity. We must remember to define our relationship with the divine on our own terms. We're not rejecting faith, but again, we're removing dependency. God must no longer be mediated through foreign lenses. The second is our own epistemistic liberation. We must remember to control knowledge production. What are we teaching in our school systems in Africa? I can say for myself, Ghana's colonial education and religious institutions where we get whipped in class for speaking our own language. This affects how we think about ourselves and our own self-worth. So we must decide what we validate as truth, because whoever controls knowledge controls destiny. Thirdly, we must have an economic reorientation. Africa must move from capitalism to community-centered development, which is how our ancestors initially lived. Capitalism prioritizes profit over people. It operates on a mindset of individual survival, sustained by systems that depend on inequality. It's a bureaucratic system where nothing is personal, it's just business. I love you, but I gotta pay my rent tomorrow. It breeds a Cain mentality, reminding you constantly that you are not your brother's keeper. However, African economic thought has always been communal. We are our brother's keeper. So we must remember our ancient economies that reflected African values, not external demand. And finally, and probably what I believe must come first, is our Pan-African unity. The division between Africans from the continent and Africans in the diaspora must end. Africa must see itself as one people with a shared destiny. This has always been the Pan-African vision. None of what has been spoken about, no social, political, or socio-economic, or even religio-cultural liberation can truly be possible without first establishing reconciliation between Africans on the continent and in the diaspora. Because the truth is, the Pan-African family cannot confront or even overcome the enduring impacts of the plagues of white supremacy in isolation. We cannot be divided and expect to be liberated. Liberation requires unity, and unity begins with reconciliation. Next slide. So as was mentioned in the introduction, this was the vision behind Ghana's Year of Return in 2019, an initiative that I am both proud and humbled to say that I helped shape through the original proposal that contributed to its realization. The aim was to establish Ghana initially as the spiritual homeland for all Black people, a point of reconnection and return for people of African descent across the diaspora. This vision was grounded in two key historical and global frameworks. At the time, the United Nations had declared the years 2015 to 2024 being the International Decade for People of African Descent. And then in 2017, the U.S. H.R. 1242 bill marked the 400 years since the first enslaved Africans came to the United States. So together, these moments created a powerful opportunity to move from historical acknowledgement to spiritual and cultural reconnection, positioning Ghana not just as a destination, but as a source. Next slide. And of course, since we have all our African brothers and sisters here, we might ask, why Ghana? Well, I say, why not? Ghana has a rich history with Pan-Africanism, as you can see. We can start with Ghana. There were so many fun facts about Ghana that made Ghana quite interesting. Ghana, because of Kwame Nkrumah creating Ghana to be a Pan-African nation, we had in our constitution the right of abode that extended dual citizenship to descendants of the Atlantic slave trade. We also adopted the Black Star representing the Marcus Garvey movement on our national flag, representing if you wanted to come back to Africa. Ghana, we had a motto that said that Ghana was the gateway into Africa because it literally was the gateway out of Africa. Even though you may not have come from Ghana, majority of our ancestors who were enslaved had to almost come through Ghana in order to get to the New World. And so Ghana had held about almost 70% of the slave forts in Africa on our coasts. We also have folks like W.B. Du Bois, who called Ghana the vanguard of Pan-Africanism. Dr. Martin Luther King, during Ghana being the first country to gain independence from colonial rule, Martin Luther King called Ghana, during its independence, the birth of a new nation, where he called Ghana the Promised Land. And we can go on and on and on about all these prophetic and contemplative responsibilities that Ghana has had towards its brothers and sisters in the diaspora. And so, next slide. While the Year of Return was undeniably successful in bridging the gap between the continent and the diaspora, creating a significant paradigm shift in social, political, and socioeconomic opportunities such as dual citizenship and land acquisition, business investments, and even royal installments. It was clear, what we learned, that there remained a critical dimension that was not fully realized. That the original vision that I wrote in my proposal, that was not solely economic or touristic, but spiritual, religious, and cultural at its core. We recognized that over time, that dimension was largely overshadowed by commercialization. What began as a sacred call to return gradually evolved into what is now widely known as Deti December in Ghana. I'm sure our young folks know about that. Where Ghana has become more recognized as a global party destination rather than the intended spiritual home for people of African descent. More importantly, the deeper work that was required, the healing of historical wounds caused by slavery and colonization, was never adequately addressed. The estrangement between Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora remains a lived reality, even as we begin to reunite with each other. And as a result, while efforts towards reconnection and reparative initiatives are underway, the absence of intentional healing has at times produced misunderstandings and tension and mutual suspicion. And Ghana has admirably taken on the responsibility of championing the cause of the diaspora. Other Africans have as well, African countries, opening their doors through policies and partnerships and symbolic acts of return. But we must be clear, and this is also a plea to my fellow colleagues on both sides of the Atlantic, that reconciliation cannot start with economic and political frameworks. Next slide. The foundation of true Pan-African reconciliation must be spiritual. It must address identity. It must address memory. It must address our historical trauma and the restoration of a shared sense of origin. Next slide. So this is precisely the work that the God Box does. Our own motto is remembering God's children. This becomes essential, and this is why our recent endorsements from the Office of the President of Ghana are quite both timely and necessary. Because what we have realized in Ghana with our experiences with the Year of Return is that although the Year of Return has built the bridge and folks are coming in and out of the continent, we recognize that we have not yet restored the people who cross this bridge. So I would like to close this presentation with a plea to my colleagues and scholars and to the wider Pan-African family. This endorsement is asking us to begin registering for the hard conversations that need to be had. Beginning this May and all the way throughout the year to December, we will convene a series of dialogues, bringing together faith leaders, legislators, scholars, practitioners, activists from both sides of the Atlantic. And these will not be easy conversations. They're not intended to. They are necessary conversations, conversations that will confront the trauma that still exists, the wounds that still must be healed, the deep estrangement that we have with one another that causes the mutual suspicion. All this must be addressed, and healing must take place if we are truly to achieve reconciliation and lasting liberation. These dialogues will lead to spiritual pilgrimages to Ghana in 2027. Because we have learned that although the Year of Return did create the bridge, we must restore the souls that walk across this bridge. Because until we heal the people, the bridge will never fulfill its purpose. I want to end on this note, but on a lighter note, as we talk about remembrance. I'm sure as Africans, we're all familiar with the movie The Lion King, one of my favorite movies. But I think The Lion King kind of sums up what I mean by us remembering. Here we have Simba, whose father passes away and his world is completely distorted. He goes on and forgets his own identity, goes to a foreign land and space and interacts with people that he would normally not interact with. He begins to forget even where he came from. And one day there's this prophet. What was the name of the prophet, the monkey? I forgot his name. But this prophet calls him and says, "You forgot who you are. You're looking for your father is still alive." And he says, "I'll take you to him." And this Simba begins running through the wilderness. All he cares about is seeing his father once again. And as he goes through the wilderness, he gets to the water, and the prophet tells him to look in the water. And as he looks into the water, he sees his image. He says, "That's not my father." And the prophet tells him to look a little deeper. And he looks deeper, and he begins to see the image of his father in himself. And if you remember, his father continues to tell him to remember. And immediately Simba runs back to his kingdom, to where he comes from, remembers who he is, gains his identity, and then, in essence, his purpose. And I think that's a profound story that kind of symbolizes what we need to do as Africans, is to remember. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much, Dr. Buhari. I actually have a lot of questions, but I won't dominate the space. Before we start with Q&A, I just want to send a reminder to those who are doing the poster presentations to go get set up, because right after the Q&A, we're going to head out into the poster presentation and do lunch and networking. Let's get started. First, let me ask my question since I have the mic. My question is, how do we handle the benefits of the easy benefits of development, in quotation, given its ease and comfort, in spite of its disruptive nature on people and the environment, and also given our tendency as humans to pursue the path of least resistance? So, for example, ordering from DoorDash versus, I'm just giving a vague example, but I think naturally, if you can take a car and it's easier and it contaminates the environment, why would you then go for the other? So that's my general question, yeah.
No, thank you for that question. I think that complacency oftentimes is our biggest enemy. Comfort is also one of our enemies. One thing I've noticed about the Pan-African family, especially in the diaspora, is we don't start thinking about Africa until we start getting uncomfortable. That's all of a sudden, not only are Africans thinking about Africa, even white folks start thinking about Africa once we start getting uncomfortable. We've seen that with the Trump administration. So I think complacency and comfort is an enemy that we have to watch out for. And I want to premise that statement by saying to go back to our past isn't necessarily meaning to do away with modernism or technology or any of that. Again, as I use the statement, is to go deeper into what we've already done. So we're not necessarily forgetting all these modern technological advances that help make life easier. But making sure that rather than it be just Africanizing it, going back to the source and making sure that its foundations are rooted in African epistemology.
Thank you very much. So for the Q&A, you can, we'll call upon you. You can come here, ask your question, and then I think it's closer. You can be heard, and then we'll go that way. So yeah, Yasmin.
Hi, Dr. Gilbert. Thank you for this presentation. I have two different questions. The first one is about the definition of development and how it can be linked to Africa in the context of African development. So something really interesting is that when I was younger, for me, development was just like a country having good economy. But I feel like that was what was applied to most of the countries. But I feel like now, the more African countries start to have that economic stability, we have new definition of development. So anytime we always had it. And I wonder if it's just because we don't want to recognize any African country being developed, or it's just because development is really evolving. Because when I go to Morocco, when I check pictures of South Africa, I don't think I can convince anybody in a village in my country that those countries are not developed. So I'm wondering what is the real definition of development, and if us, African, we have to also like redefine what is development for us. And my second question, or even maybe comment, is about the four solution you gave, and I'm more focused on the epistemology, like thinking for ourselves, because education, like you cannot be empowered if you still take education from those who like take your empowerment. And for me, what is really interesting is most of the time when we think about like education and all, we also talk about language. We talk about the fact that we have to include our local language for people to understand. But what we don't think about is why are we studying in other language when we have knowledge from our own language? And the fact that we are learning in other language, we are losing our knowledge. And we also always think that we have to teach people. So for example, I will go with feminism because I'm more in that field. But most of the time, we tend to think that, oh, we're going to go in those villages and teach to those women how to be empowered. Did they really wait for us to be empowered, honestly? Did African women waited for feminism to be invented to fight for their rights? And we don't really talk about that. So for me, if we really want to be developed, you talk about like, going to the past. I love the idea, but I feel the past still exists in Africa even now. Because we still, like in our villages, people still build houses how we used to build before. And in those houses, you don't need to fight the weather. When it's hot outside, it's cold inside. When it's cold outside, it's hot inside. And we don't even think about that. We have architecture who come in the US, other countries, learn how to build houses. They go back, they build nice houses, but the weather is not included in. Because of course, when you come in the US and learn about architecture, you will not learn about like your tropical environment. You will learn about like how to fight the cold. So I feel like with that epistemology side, we like the scientific researchers and all, we really have to truly humble ourselves and realize that it's not always us who have to teach our other people how to like be developed, but we can really learn from our people. So I feel if we do that combination of like really humbling ourselves and learning from the people who we think that they live in the past, we might actually like have the idea of the Sankofa and be developed.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was a question and a comment. And but that was a powerful comment that you made. It's interesting because, as you're saying, you know, Africa seems to be the only continent where we're asked to forget our past in order to move forward. No other continent is asked to do that. And so, as you're saying, there is, well, in Ghana, we like to call it our ancient and ancestral technology that we used. We like to call it African electronics. We don't call it technology. And that's African electronics is quite close to spirituality. And so going back to your first question about development, and yes, I think that we definitely need to redefine what development and progress means. Clearly, it has a westernized notion around, and as I said, in that sense, it's linear rather than circular. And so once we start to get into our African traditions, we'll understand what development looks like when it's circular. So progress, if we say that we give birth to our ancestors, that might seem quite, are we moving forward or are we going backwards, right? And this is what it means to have a circular understanding of ourselves. And so we also have to be careful of the false integration, where power still remains in the hands of the Western dominant group. And so when we're coming together, and nowadays we like to call ourselves hybrids, but again, when power still remains in a dominant group and you come together in that way, that's a false integration. And so we have to make sure that we're able to level the playing field on that end before we integrate. And then I think you also said, the local languages. I mentioned that one of the things when I grew up in Ghana, one of the things that they would write on the classroom blackboard, do not speak your own language in class, right? And the idea behind that was that we're in school and we're trying to get educated so that, and learn English and all these things so that we can hurry up and come out here and be able to do what we're doing now, right? And that when we go back home, our parents will speak our languages with us. What's happening is that our generation of folks are quite westernized. And so we're not going back home speaking our own languages. We're also speaking English back home because our parents have also been westernized. And so the languages are completely disappearing. Now, some folks may say that learning English is a good thing. And, it helps all African countries able to communicate with each other. But I think, again, that's another notion of false integration. I know through our Pan-African agenda, we're not defining ourselves as countries, but as tribes, that our differences must be used as wealth to be shared amongst each other rather than separating us. And so, as you were saying, there's enormous knowledge that comes from using our own language. Something like Akwaba. I'm sure Ghanaians, we use, if you've come to Ghana, you will hear Akwaba. Yeah, exactly, right? Akwaba. It means welcome, right? And again, when you say Akwaba, you ask anybody, they say it means welcome. But this is an example of how powerful our language is when we decide to use our own language. Akwaba, when you break the word down, it means Akwa Aba, right? Which means you have gone and now you've returned. It has a little deeper meaning than welcome, right? English almost has no meaning until you give it meaning. But in our own languages, the meaning exists within the language itself, right? And I can go on and on. When you say medase, when you go and you say, what does medase mean? Somebody will immediately say, thank you. That's what it means, medase. But when you break the word down, medase means midawase, right? Which means I am under you. So now thank you means something a little deeper. When you say thank you to someone, or you say medase, means I am under you now. It's almost like I'm in debt to you, right? So thank you is not something you just say and you keep it moving, right? It's something that now you know you are indebted to this person. You almost owe this person something. So maybe we'll start using, we're not going to use thank you as lightly as we use it, right? And so so I appreciate your question and your comment because, again, it expounds on the necessity and the wisdom, really, that we gain from using our own local languages and using that knowledge to redefine what development and progress means.
Thank you. We just have time for just one question. I would like you to select from the audience, because
Sure,
okay. Oh, okay, yeah.
Appreciate it because you speak my mind, because all the things that you have mentioned in here, say for instance the idea of being circular. I am from Ethiopia, so anything in Ethiopia is represented by circle. It has a definition and a meaning. If you go to the Ethiopian house, it is circular. Our church or mosque, circle. And even the utensils that we use, the grill, everything. And the palaces were circle. It has its own historical background. In our traditional Ethiopian school, it was a circular setting. Everything was circle. But since my sister mentioned about development, now it literally gives me a hard time to process, because like by the name of development, I don't know whose development and for whom. Everything is changed. If you go to Addis, say for instance, if you go to the old cities of Gondar, Lalibela, and others, all the architectures are different. Now the government is aggressively trying to destroy and create a European-like developmental agenda. My question to you is, I know it is like a common problem across Africa, because most of the fund that we get is from others, and at the same time the political representatives or the bourgeoisies or those who are in the black skin and other mentality. So how are we going to reclaim who we are? Because as you said, which I 100% agree, that our redemption is in our past, not in our future, because we have something in the past. And then the problem is we're struggling, the disconnect is from our past and who we are right now. So I need your reflection, how are we going to bridge? Because like the Sankofa and the idea of this Ubuntu, me, I'm here, but I represent my ancestors. So how are we going to create that bridge, especially in education? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That's the dilemma, right? And I think that again, one thing we need to do is recognize that the governments that are in place, and this is from my own experience with Ghana, that they're not necessarily interested in what we're talking about, right? And I'm assuming that's governments all over. Governments in general have their own agenda. And even when you bring something like this to them, whilst they may endorse it, they will eventually begin to facilitate, and it becomes distorted. So the first thing I'll say is we got to keep this in-house. That's the first thing, rather than seeking government assistance. You saw I got the endorsement, but I've learned from the year of return. And I realized how they marketed and commercialized it, where it completely lost its essence and its spiritual emphasis on it. So I think that first thing to do is to keep it in-house and have almost, rather than from a top to bottom agenda, it needs to come from the bottom up. So as you were talking about, and I believe our sister as well spoke about, you know, how our systems are still there. They're not our belief systems, our notions of the African notions and foundations of development, our shrines. You know, one of our presidents, former presidents, also a great Pan-Africanist, J.J. Rawlings, he said that if you take an African, any African, even if they claim to be Christian, and you put their hand on the Bible, and you tell them to swear never to lie, they will lie all day. You take that same African to the shrine, and you tell them to lie, they will never lie. That gives you a good idea of who we know, whose we are, right? And so again, our systems exist, our knowledge exists. Again, colonization didn't destroy them. It just made us abandon them. And so what we need to do is recognize that these things are still intact. And as you said, you know, there are still folks in these villages, in these spaces. You from Ghana, in Cape Coast, you can't speak without someone always never answering you, but giving you a reference to the ancestors' wisdom. What's today, right? And so we're always referencing what the ancestors said before we speak. And so these are things that I think we can start there from the bottom, right? And then I believe with the Year of Return, a lot of our success also was with our own traditional leaders, our chiefs and queen mothers that were in these spaces that also still carry the wisdom, the African wisdom that we have. And we always have to be careful with tourism and other things where we're just so easily, I believe in Africa, especially in Ghana, we've been democratic to a fault in terms of our hospitality. And so again, we need to be a little more in-house in how we deal with each other. And I think that essentially, once we understand our source and our roots, and we begin to define our realities through those spaces, I think we'll be able to get back to the development that you're speaking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure lots of people have a lot of questions to ask. During the poster presentation launch, it's a good opportunity to network and ask questions. I am curious, I want to get resources on how to, I feel like when you go online and you're trying to learn about African history, it's either very academic or you're looking for different resources here and there. So it would be very nice, Dr. Buhari, if you could provide us with resources that is maybe congealed and very readily available to the average person to learn about how to get in touch with their history. Thank you very much, everyone. So now we have, next on the agenda is poster presentations, which is happening at the same time with lunch. So poster presentations will be from 12 to 12:30, and then lunch and networking will be from 12 to 1 p.m. So yeah, thank you very much for being with us for this morning's session, and we look forward to meeting you here again at 1 for the afternoon session led by our good moderator, Amazing. So yeah, thank you all. Yeah, that's it.